Welcome to the new and improved SAT Grammar Bootcamp. My name is Rob and I will be the tutor, your guide, your host through this video series. The point of the SAT Grammar Bootcamp is to give you an overview of the basic rules you'll need to know for grammar for the SAT. Now, we go into some technical detail. That's kind of unavoidable with the way I like to teach the section. We do need to learn about these concepts like clauses and phrases and gerunds. But if you put in the time and effort, and if you learn these rules and follow along, take notes in the videos, and do the practice problems, then you'll be right where you want to be. The other series, once you finish with the Grammar Bootcamp, you will want to move on next to the Grammar Tactics series. And this is where I actually go through real SAT questions and show you how the concepts and rules we learned in the bootcamp apply there. So go ahead and check out those videos when you're done. If there's a particular topic you want to do practice problems on, I pretty much on the heading of each video, I give you an idea about where you can find videos for practice problems related to that topic. Speaking of the screen here, this stuff I'm taking off the screen comes from the SAT Grammar Study Guide. There's a link to it in the description. It goes with the bootcamp and with part of the tactics series. Basically, it is the little pad you can use to take notes, the worksheets you can do to follow along, take notes, write your own stuff in the margins, whatever you want to do to follow along. Yeah, so that's it. Let's just go ahead and get started with the first lesson, which is noun basics. So nouns are generally defined to be persons, places, things, or ideas, right? So any kind of thing in the world. Later, we're going to talk about a specific kind of noun called a noun phrase, and these can get a bit more complex. But for now, the easiest thing to talk about is just a noun, person, place, thing, or idea. Now, there are two major categories of nouns, and you don't necessarily need to know this specifically for the SAT. They're not going to test this directly, but just to get the stuff out of the way. A proper noun is a specific noun, and it's often capitalized. So, for instance, Bob, France, Madison Square Garden. Right? Anything that's specific, anything that is special in that way is going to be capitalized. Whereas a common noun, this is what we're going to see most often, are just basic nouns that are not capitalized. So tiger, person, freedom. Now, the main thing to remember with nouns is that nouns can act generally in two ways. They can act as subjects or they can act as objects. Now, nouns as subjects. So the subject of the sentence is often, but not always, the doer or the beer of an action in that sentence. Now, this is true most of the time. We're going to see later with something called the passive voice that this isn't going to be always true. With the passive voice, the subject of the sentence is not the doer. So for this sentence, what is the subject? John loves Mary. Well, John is the doer of the action. He is the person who's doing the loving. So he is the subject. So we would label this as the subject. How about this? The president of the university is brilliant. Well, what's the subject here? Who or what is brilliant? If you ever have issues finding the subject, ask the question, once you find the main verb, who or what is doing that action? So who is brilliant in this example? Well, it's the president of the university is brilliant, right? So the president, this is our simple subject. This is our subject right here. Who is the president of a university is brilliant. Now note, this is something that's going to come up later. This of the university is something we're going to call a prepositional phrase, and we're going to talk about these later. But notice this is not the subject. Even though it's right next to the verb, it's not the subject. It's an adjective basically describing the president, but it's not the subject. So anything after prepositions is not going to be a subject. Keep that in mind. It's very important. Nouns could also act as objects. So these are when nouns are acting as the receiver or the beneficiary of an action. So a direct object would be something that's actually being affected by that action in a direct way. So for instance, John hits the ball. Well, John is the subject. Hits, obviously, is our verb. And the ball is our direct object. It is the thing being hit, so it is receiving that action. An indirect object is pretty much the beneficiary of an action. It's not, the action isn't directly affecting them, but they are in some way involved in it. So an example, John gave Bob the letter. So John is our subject. Gave is our verb. What did he give? Well, he gave the letter, so this is our direct object. And Bob in this example is the indirect object. He is the person who is the beneficiary. The letter is given to him. So you can see, well, you could also write this sentence, John gave the letter to Bob. Right? There's our indirect object. So those are the main two things to keep in mind. We're going to obviously explain more on this later. The main thing to know for nouns, they're generally going to be correct on the SAT, except for noun agreement errors, which we're going to talk about in a second. Though in identifying the subjects of sentences, as we've talked about a little bit, finding out the antecedents of pronouns, which we'll talk about later, and verbs acting as nouns, gerunds, again, all things we'll talk about later, being able to identify these things is critical for identifying other grammar errors. So while nouns really only are wrong with noun agreement errors, they are part of other errors, so we do need to be able to recognize them for that reason. Okay, let's move on to the next video.